I'm Amelia, 29, and I work as a graphic designer. My husband Mark and I live in a quiet suburb where the evenings smell like cut grass and the neighbors wave when you pass. Mark freelances in web development and handles projects for small businesses, which means he sets his own hours. We built a life that fits us, steady, calm, and creative. My parents, Evelyn and Richard, never liked that. They started criticizing my choices as soon as I graduated college. First, it was my job, because freelancing and contract design work didn't look as solid as a 9-to-5 office role. Then it was the house we rented, which they called too small and temporary. They always had something to pick apart, and it didn't stop when Mark proposed. When Mark and I announced our wedding plans, my parents dismissed the whole thing as a mistake. They said Mark was unreliable and hinted he wouldn't be able to provide for a family. They wanted us to postpone until we could afford a big formal ceremony. We decided on a simple backyard wedding with close friends instead. The day turned out beautiful, even though my parents kept their comments sharp and short during the reception. A year later, I found out I was pregnant. We told them over dinner at their house, hoping for at least a little excitement. Instead, Evelyn stared at me like I'd just confessed a crime. Richard asked if we had planned it. They called me too soft, too disorganized to handle a baby. Evelyn went so far as to predict I'd burn out in 6 months, and suggested that if things got hard, we could give the baby up for adoption. Mark took my hand that night as we drove home and promised that we'd raise our child with love and structure, no matter what anyone else said. He meant it, and I clung to that. Pregnancy wasn't easy. During the second trimester, I had complications that forced me to stay on bed rest for weeks. Doctor visits filled our calendar. Mark adjusted his projects so he could drive me to appointments. I kept up with my design clients from bed, sending drafts and proofs while propped up with pillows. Through all of it, my parents barely checked in. They told relatives they were letting me learn responsibility, like this was some lesson instead of their grandchild's life. Clara was born on a rainy night after a long labor. I remember the sound of the rain on the hospital windows more than anything else. She came out strong and healthy, a perfect little person who looked up at us with wide, dark eyes. Exhaustion settled into my bones, but it was the kind that feels earned. Evelyn and Richard visited the next day. Evelyn wrinkled her nose at the pale yellow nursery walls we'd chosen and said the color would warp a child's sense of calm. Richard laughed and joked about calling child services when he noticed a stack of unfolded blankets. The nurse gave him a sharp look, but he only smirked. The moment they left, Mark and I decided that visits would be scheduled and brief. Weeks passed. Friends dropped by to meet Clara and brought tiny clothes, rattles, and warm casseroles. They noticed my parents were absent from milestones like Clara's first smile and her first pediatric checkup. People asked where they were, and I didn't have a good answer beyond a shrug. As the months went on, I found a rhythm. I balanced client projects during Clara's naps, sending mock-ups to businesses that needed new logos or marketing designs. Mark picked up more freelance work too. Slowly, we began to prove every one of my parents' doubts wrong. By Clara's first spring, Mark's contracts had grown so steady that we were able to buy a modest house. No family loans, no co-signers, just our savings and the income we built together. We painted the walls soft blue and white, hung Clara's first finger paintings on the fridge, and planted a small garden out back. One night after Clara had fallen asleep, I sat on the porch with Mark and listened to the distant hum of traffic. We talked about how far we'd come from the couple my parents doubted. In that quiet moment, I made a promise to myself. I would build a home filled with warmth, patience, and love, the exact opposite of what my parents had predicted. Every choice since has been about protecting that peace. Clara's first birthday arrived with a sky so clear it looked painted. Mark and I decorated the backyard with string lights and paper lanterns, setting up a table covered in bright cupcakes and a small cake topped with a single candle. Friends from the neighborhood, a few of Mark's colleagues, and parents from Clara's playgroup filled the yard with chatter. I sent an invitation to my parents weeks earlier, hoping a milestone like this might thaw the distance between us. They arrived late, walking through the gate while everyone else gathered around the cake. Evelyn carried a huge bag wrapped in metallic paper, the kind that crinkled with every move. Richard balanced a bulky box with cartoon dinosaurs printed on it. They set the box down and unwrapped a toy that lit up in loud flashing colors and blasted siren noises. Clara startled at the sudden sound, pressing her face into my shoulder. Evelyn laughed and said it would toughen her up. Richard made a joke about us surviving year one, like parenting was a dare we barely passed. I tried to keep the party moving. We sang, Clara smeared frosting on her cheeks, and our friends took photos. After the candles were out and the plates cleared, Evelyn started pointing out the sugar content of the cake and questioned Clara's diet. Her voice carried over the music. I thanked everyone for coming and quietly ended the visit. My parents left with stiff smiles, their loud toy still screeching from the corner until I switched it off. A week later, a major design contract landed in my inbox. A regional company wanted a full branding package, logos, website graphics, printed materials. It was the largest project I'd ever secured. The payment schedule meant I could take on fewer small jobs while focusing on this big one. Mark adjusted his workload too, cutting back on late-night freelance hours so we could balance Clara's care and my new schedule. With both of us working, we decided to enroll Clara in a nearby daycare 3 days a week. The program had a cozy setup, with bright rooms, small classes, and a gentle daily routine. Clara took to it right away, toddling toward the play area on the first day without hesitation. When my parents heard about daycare, Evelyn called it lazy parenting. She said I should quit work and stay home, that sending Clara out at her age was neglect. I explained the benefits, socialization, learning from other children, creative play, but she dismissed every word. Mark kept his voice calm and steady, repeating that this was the best choice for our family and Clara's development. Summer arrived, and we planned our first vacation as a family of 3. We rented a small cottage near the beach, a place with soft sand and gentle waves. Clara squealed as tiny crabs scuttled near the water's edge, her small feet chasing patterns in the foam. We built sandcastles, cooked simple meals in the cottage kitchen, and watched sunsets melt into the ocean. When we returned, Evelyn phoned to ask how we'd spent our time. I mentioned the beach trip, and she scolded me for wasting money on sand and photos, saying we should have saved every penny for real emergencies. I kept the call short. Not long after, Clara developed a persistent cough. A pediatrician diagnosed mild asthma and prescribed an inhaler. We adjusted her room to reduce dust and added an air filter. Mark and I made a schedule for regular checkups and kept notes on her breathing patterns. When I updated my parents, they brushed it off as overprotective nonsense, claiming every child coughed in summer. Meanwhile, our circle of support grew. The daycare parents formed a friendly network, swapping recipes and watching each other's kids during busy hours. Neighbors dropped by with fresh bread or invited us to backyard barbecues. Clara loved these small gatherings, running across lawns with other toddlers and showing off new words she'd learned at daycare. One afternoon, while I worked on a design draft in the home studio, Clara sat next to me with a pad of paper and a set of colored pencils. She began to draw sweeping shapes, mixing blues and greens. Mark came in to watch, smiling as she held the pencil with surprising control for her age. We pinned her little painting on the fridge, the first of many. My contract with the regional company extended for another 6 months after the initial package was complete. They loved the work and wanted more seasonal designs. The steady income allowed us to start a savings plan for Clara's education and handle house repairs without stress. Each planned visit with my parents followed the same pattern. We'd schedule a short meeting, an hour at most. They'd arrive with subtle critiques, comments about Clara's clothes or our home, questions about whether we really needed daycare or vacations. Clara sensed the tension, her chatter growing quiet when they entered the room. After each visit, Mark and I agreed to space the next one even further apart. The gap widened on its own. Invitations to small events went unanswered or received last-minute excuses. When Clara had her next checkup, we didn't bother updating them on the results. Instead, we focused on the friends who supported us. The neighbor who brought over a new plant for our garden. The daycare mom who shared her grandmother's cookie recipe. The small group who celebrated Clara's first painting like it belonged in a gallery. Life settled into a rhythm of steady work, growing friendships, and Clara's happy chatter. The louder my parents' criticisms became, the less room they had in our days. Our home stayed filled with art supplies, the scent of fresh bread from the neighbor's kitchen, and the quiet laughter of a little girl discovering her world. When I looked at the walls covered with Clara's drawings and the calendar full of playdates, I saw how different our life was from the one my parents predicted. Every week brought new colors, new shapes, and a little more proof that we were building something strong on our own terms. Clara turned 3 with a burst of curiosity that filled every corner of the house. She climbed onto stools to watch me draw, mixed colors in her small paint set, and carried a sketch pad almost everywhere. By summer, we enrolled her in a creative preschool, a short drive from home. The building smelled of fresh paper and wood blocks, and the classrooms buzzed with music and laughter. Clara walked in on her first day wearing a paint-splattered apron from our kitchen and joined a circle of children without hesitation. A week after classes began, the school administrator called me about an odd situation. Someone claiming to be Clara's grandmother had arrived with forms for a more academic program across town, saying she wanted to transfer her granddaughter immediately. The office refused since the paperwork listed only Mark and me as decision-makers. When I asked for details, the description of the visitor left no doubt it was Evelyn. I visited the school the next morning with Mark to confirm that no one but us could change Clara's enrollment. The staff documented everything and updated their files to block any attempt without our signatures. Autumn brought the first big family gathering since Clara's birthday. We joined Mark's relatives for a long table dinner in his cousin's backyard, string lights glowing above us. My parents accepted the invitation after weeks of silence. As we passed dishes and listened to music, Richard steered the conversation toward work and freelancing. He joked that Mark's career was a hobby that got lucky, a comment that made several guests glance down at their plates. Mark poured more water into Clara's cup and moved the topic to the weather without a flicker of reaction. Later that evening, while we packed Clara's toys into a bag, she tugged at my sleeve and asked why Grandma always seemed upset. Her small voice carried a weight bigger than her years. I knelt beside her and explained that sometimes adults choose unkind words, but it wasn't her fault and nothing she did caused it. Clara nodded and went back to stacking her blocks. As winter settled in, Clara's class held a preschool art show in a local community hall. She submitted a bright painting of the neighborhood park, a swirl of greens and blues that captured the exact feel of a windy afternoon. Her teacher called a week later to share the news that Clara's piece had won a small local award. We invited friends, neighbors, and of course my parents to the showcase. The hall buzzed with families admiring tiny sculptures and finger-painted masterpieces. Clara stood beside her painting, wearing a wide smile, holding a small ribbon the judges had given her. But Evelyn and Richard never arrived. No text, no call, no explanation. When the evening ended and we walked to the car under a chilly sky, Clara asked if her grandparents had missed the directions. Mark and I simply said they couldn't make it. 2 days later, our backyard filled with neighbors and daycare friends for a casual celebration. We set up a long table with cookies and warm cider, and Clara proudly showed everyone her ribbon, while kids ran through piles of leaves. Laughter drifted through the air long after dark. That night, the phone rang. Richard's voice carried sharp edges as he accused me of showing off Clara to strangers and turning art into a spectacle. I kept the call short and ended it without argument. After that, I decided our contact would shrink to a single brief phone check in each month. Nothing more. Mark agreed, and we stuck to it. While family ties thinned, our household thrived. Clara began prepping for kindergarten with excitement that spilled into every evening. She practiced writing her name with colored markers and lined up stuffed animals as pretend classmates. We visited the school she would attend the next year, a cheerful building with wide windows and a bright playground. Clara traced her fingers along the fence and said she wanted to learn everything. Around the same time, Mark landed a major contract with a design firm that specialized in eco-friendly projects. The job meant steady work for a year, and enough income to renovate our home studio. We cleared out a spare room, installed wide desks, and added shelves for Clara's growing art collection. Sawdust and the scent of fresh paint filled the house for weeks as workers hammered and sanded. When I mentioned the good news to my parents during the next short call, Evelyn's reaction was ice cold. She said money won't fix your lack of discipline, then changed the subject to the weather. I let the silence stretch until she ended the call. Clara noticed the changes too. During the next scheduled check-in, when I offered her the phone to say a quick hello, she shook her head and whispered that she didn't want to talk. The pattern repeated the following month. Each time I asked if she wanted to speak, she quietly declined and returned to her crayons or picture books. I stopped asking after a while. Life outside those strained calls moved fast. Clara's preschool hosted weekend art walks where families strolled between classrooms to see student projects. She guided us from display to display, pointing out collages and paper sculptures made by her friends. Neighbors dropped by with small gifts of craft supplies, and a local coffee shop asked if Clara's class would decorate a corner wall with seasonal art. On weekends, we visited the park or met with the friends we'd made through daycare. Clara played tag while Mark and I chatted with other parents about school plans and favorite hikes. Our garden flourished, and the walls of the renovated studio filled with both my digital designs and Clara's bold strokes of color. The distance from my parents grew, but it didn't leave a void. Instead, our home filled with steady laughter, music from Clara's favorite songs, and the quiet hum of computers as Mark and I worked side by side. Every new project, every drawing taped to the fridge, showed a life built on choices that worked for us, not on the criticism we'd left behind. When spring light streamed through the studio windows and Clara painted her next masterpiece, I realized how far we'd traveled from those early days of doubt. Each step, preschool milestones, new contracts, art ribbons, moved us forward while the voices of disapproval faded into the background, smaller and smaller with every passing month. Clara started kindergarten on a bright Monday morning with a backpack covered in painted stars and a grin that lit up the hallway. She walked through the school doors without hesitation, waving at the teacher and joining a small group of children building towers from colorful blocks. The classroom smelled of crayons and warm bread from the cafeteria, and her excitement set the tone for the week. On the second day, while I helped a parent volunteer set up a reading corner, the office staff called me with urgent voices. Evelyn and Richard had appeared in the lobby, asking questions about the curriculum and demanding to see Clara's teacher. They carried clipboards and spoke as if they were inspecting a business. The secretary explained that only Mark and I were on the emergency contact list and that unplanned visits weren't allowed. The principal met them at the door and escorted them out after a short exchange. By the time I arrived, they were already leaving the parking lot. That evening, I called to make our boundaries clear. I told them that school decisions were mine, and Mark's alone, and that any attempt to visit Clara without our knowledge would not be allowed. My parents offered no apology, only a curt acknowledgement before ending the conversation. A few days later, a delivery arrived at our doorstep, a sleek, expensive tablet packaged with a bright bow and a card signed "Love from Grandma and Grandpa." The note said it was for Clara's early education. Mark and I boxed it back up and returned it with a polite message thanking them but stating we didn't want Clara receiving electronics from anyone without our approval. Clara noticed the tension. One evening while arranging her pencils, she said she felt nervous when her grandparents showed up without warning. Her small voice carried more worry than any child her age should have. We reassured her that school was a safe place and that unannounced visits wouldn't happen again. Despite the disruption, Clara thrived. Her teacher sent notes home praising her for helping a shy classmate adjust to the new classroom. She shared crayons, explained games, and invited the quiet child to sit with her at lunch. These small acts of kindness earned her a mention during the school's morning announcements, which filled her with pride. Autumn brought the annual neighborhood art fair. I set up a small table for Clara's paintings, framed in simple wooden borders. Her colorful scenes of gardens, rivers, and animals caught people's attention quickly. By midday, every piece had sold, and Clara decided to donate the proceeds to a children's charity the school supported. Neighbors congratulated her and snapped pictures of her smiling behind the table. Later that week, Evelyn called to dismiss the entire event as childish, saying I was exploiting Clara's talent for attention. I kept the call short and focused on the positive memories of the fair instead of her remarks. As the first semester ended, Mark arranged for a family photo session in a nearby park. We wore simple clothes in soft colors while the photographer captured Clara running through piles of golden leaves. The photos came out warm and full of life, Clara's hair flying as she twirled and laughed. When I shared a framed picture with my parents, Richard commented that Clara looked too wild, as if joy were something to criticize. When December arrived, I planned a small winter gathering with close friends instead of a large family holiday. We decorated the house with white lights, baked cookies with neighbors, and set up a table where the kids could make paper snowflakes. Invitations went to the people who supported us throughout the year, friends from school, daycare families, and a few kind neighbors who had become like extended family. Before the gathering, Evelyn left a voicemail accusing me of stealing traditions and said we were freezing them out. I didn't respond, Our focus stayed on creating a warm evening for those who cared about us. The highlight of the season came when Clara performed a solo in the winter concert at her school. The auditorium filled with parents holding cameras and cups of hot cocoa. Clara stepped forward in a soft blue dress and sang her part with clear, steady notes that carried through the room. When the final chord ended, the audience rose in a standing ovation. Teachers smiled, friends cheered, and Clara's classmates clapped with excitement. After the concert, Mark and I walked home under a sky filled with tiny snowflakes. We talked quietly about the months behind us, the unexpected school visit, the returned tablet, the art fair, and the concert that capped it all. Every event confirmed what we already knew. Keeping a measured distance from my parents protected Clara's happiness and allowed our home to stay calm. The new year opened with a house full of Clara's artwork and laughter from friends who felt more like family than the relatives who kept their distance. Our world stayed bright and steady while the noise of criticism faded further into the background, replaced by the sound of Clara humming the melody from her winter solo as she sketched her next masterpiece. Spring arrived with longer days and a rush of green across the neighborhood. Clara, now settled into kindergarten, spent hours outside with classmates exploring science projects and nature walks. She came home with pockets full of tiny leaves and stories about measuring plant growth in the school garden. Her teachers often sent notes about how she encouraged other students to join group activities, guiding them with patience and enthusiasm. One Saturday morning, while I prepared breakfast, the phone rang. Evelyn's voice carried a sharp demand for weekly visits, saying grandparents had rights and we needed to let them see Clara more often. I ended the call after stating our schedule wouldn't change. To be certain, I checked with a family attorney later that week. The lawyer confirmed that in our state, grandparents had no automatic visitation rights when both parents agreed on boundaries. The answer brought clarity and a path forward. Clara continued to shine at school. Her class started a vegetable garden behind the playground, and she volunteered to help plant seedlings. Teachers reported she showed natural leadership, handing out small trowels, explaining watering steps, and making sure everyone had a turn. Photos from the day showed her grinning in a floppy sun hat, hands streaked with soil. Inspired by her excitement, Mark and I decided to upgrade our own backyard. Over 2 weekends, we cleared an unused corner, built raised beds for vegetables, and added a small play space with stepping stones. Neighbors stopped by to help, lending tools and extra soil. Clara loved watering the young plants each morning before school and naming every sprout as if it were a pet. A week after we finished the garden, a delivery truck pulled into our driveway with a giant boxed swing set addressed from Evelyn and Richard. The driver said it required assembly and a large space. We hadn't ordered it and hadn't been asked. I signed for the package and, after a quick photo for documentation, arranged for a pickup and return that same afternoon. A short note went back with it, polite and clear: we didn't accept unrequested deliveries. Clara's confidence kept growing. During a community picnic at the local park, she joined a group of kids in a small dance performance organized on the spot. She twirled and clapped to the music while neighbors gathered to watch. Applause filled the air as the children bowed together. The next day, a text arrived from Evelyn criticizing the event, saying Clara was becoming too common with neighborhood activities. I let the message sit unanswered. The spring teacher conference brought only positive words. Clara's teachers commended her empathy and creativity, calling her a natural storyteller who helped classmates with reading and art projects. They showed us a short story she had written and illustrated about a family of foxes who built a garden together. Soon after, Clara entered a regional art showcase with a small clay sculpture she crafted in her school's art club. Her piece, a bright swirl of shapes representing a spring sunrise, received recognition for creativity and detail. The award came with a ribbon and a feature in the school newsletter. Friends and neighbors congratulated her, some bringing small art supplies as gifts. As Clara's 7th birthday approached, our friends decided to surprise her with an art-themed party. They decorated our backyard with paper flowers and set up stations where children could paint, sculpt, and create collages. Clara beamed as she moved from table to table, showing her friends how to mix colors and cut shapes. Laughter and music floated through the warm evening air. We invited Evelyn and Richard out of courtesy, sending a simple note with the date and time. A reply came 2 days later, brief and cold, stating they had other commitments. We made no further attempt to convince them. During the party, Clara paused beside me as children chased bubbles across the lawn. She watched them for a moment and said quietly that she liked birthdays better without mean people. Then she darted off to join a group making glitter crowns. When the sun set and guests began to leave, Mark lit a few lanterns in the garden we had built together. Clara fell asleep early, her hands still flecked with paint. Mark and I toasted the day with sparkling cider, the soft glow of the lanterns reflecting off the raised beds and stepping stones. The night ended in calm. Clara's joy filled the house, and the silence that followed carried no tension, only the sound of a child's peaceful breathing and the steady rhythm of a home built on choices that kept her safe and happy. Clara stepped into 2nd grade with a fresh set of art supplies and an excitement that filled the morning air. Her school had invited a handful of students to join the Advanced Art Club, and Clara's name was on the list. She carried a folder of sketches she had worked on all summer, eager to start new projects and learn techniques from the club's art teacher. On the 2nd week of classes, a disturbance unfolded in the drop-off lane. As Mark pulled the car to the curb, Evelyn appeared from between parked vehicles, waving and calling Clara's name. The sudden movement startled Clara and drew the attention of teachers on duty. Staff members quickly stepped in, guiding Clara into the building and asking Evelyn to leave. The principal contacted us within the hour to report what happened. Later that day, the principal met with Mark and me to reaffirm that only the guardians listed in the school's records could pick up Clara. The security procedures were reviewed, and staff assured us they would remain alert for any future attempts. That evening, we gathered around the kitchen table to explain everything to Clara. We talked about how the school keeps children safe, and how the staff will always protect her. Clara listened carefully, her small hands folded on the table, and nodded when we reminded her that she could always tell us if anything felt unusual. Despite the incident, Clara's focus stayed on her art. The Advanced Club announced a competition to design a mural for the community center's new reading room. Clara's idea, a vibrant wall of trees with books nestled in the branches, won first place. Over the next month, she spent afternoons painting with a team of students, while neighbors dropped by to watch the mural come alive in bright greens and blues. One morning, a thick envelope arrived in our mailbox. Inside was a handwritten letter in my mother's cursive. The words accused me of turning Clara against family and warned that we were teaching her to reject her own blood. The paper smelled faintly of my parents' house, a scent of old wood and heavy perfume. I placed the letter in a drawer and later sent a brief message, making it clear that unannounced visits and unwanted letters had to stop. We decided a short break from daily routines would help everyone recharge. Mark booked a weekend camping trip in a state park known for quiet trails and wide lakes. We pitched a small tent beneath tall pines, cooked simple meals over a fire, and watched stars brighten the night sky. Clara carried a sketch pad everywhere, drawing trees, rocks, and the rippling lake until her fingers smudged with charcoal. Back home, Clara talked nonstop about a new friend she met in art club, a girl who shared her love for bright colors and storytelling. They spent afternoons sketching side by side in the school courtyard, swapping ideas and planning future projects. It was the first time Clara had a close friend who matched her enthusiasm for art, and their laughter filled our home whenever she came over to paint. Soon whispers reached us from the neighborhood. A couple of parents quietly mentioned that Evelyn had been telling people Clara was spoiled, claiming we gave her too much praise and freedom. The rumors faded quickly, as friends reassured us they admired Clara's kindness and natural talent. They shrugged off the gossip, focusing instead on Clara's achievements and the joy she brought to community events. The mural unveiling drew a cheerful crowd. Town officials, parents, and children filled the community center to admire the finished wall. Local reporters snapped photos and interviewed the young artists. Clara's design earned a special mention in the town newspaper the next morning, with a picture of her holding a paintbrush taller than her arm and grinning beside her teammates. To celebrate, we hosted a small dinner at our house for the art club kids, their parents, and Clara's teachers. Long tables were covered in paper so the children could doodle while eating. Laughter echoed through the house as Clara showed her friends her garden and the paintings hung in the studio. Later that night, as we cleaned up, Clara leaned against me and said she didn't want to visit her grandparents anymore because they do not like nice things. Her words came without sadness, just quiet certainty. Mark and I exchanged a look and understood without further discussion. We agreed to keep all communication with my parents brief and formal, important updates only, no casual calls, no open invitations. Our focus remained on Clara's growth and the calm life we had built around her. The weeks that followed stayed busy and bright. Clara filled sketchbooks with new ideas for future projects, while neighbors continued to praise her mural whenever they saw us at the market or in the park. Our home stayed full of music, art supplies, and steady laughter, a space where creativity and kindness drowned out the noise of unwelcome drama. Clara began third grade on a crisp September morning, carrying a sketchbook filled with bright summer memories and plans for the school's advanced art program. She volunteered right away to mentor younger students who wanted to learn drawing. Twice a week she stayed after class, showing small groups how to mix colors and shape outlines, her calm instructions making even shy first graders pick up pencils with confidence. Within weeks, her newest painting, a sunrise over the local river, caught the eye of her art teacher. The school submitted it to a state exhibition featuring young artists. A month later, an acceptance letter arrived, along with an invitation to display the piece in a downtown gallery space. The announcement filled our calendar with preparation, from framing the canvas to choosing the right outfit for the opening night. The gallery buzzed with families, teachers, and local leaders on the evening of the exhibition. Clara's painting hung on a bright white wall under soft lights, the pinks and oranges glowing like a real dawn. Guests stopped to admire the detail and ask about her inspiration. As Clara explained her process to a small group of children, the sound of raised voices broke through the music. Evelyn stood near the entrance, calling out that I was pushing Clara too hard and that children should not be treated like showpieces. Heads turned as her words echoed across the room. Mark stepped forward immediately and guided her outside without a scene. The gallery director continued the event smoothly, and Clara never lost her focus. She moved from guest to guest with the ease of someone twice her age, answering questions and accepting compliments. When we explained the interruption later at home, Clara simply said she cared only about people who appreciated art and went back to arranging her brushes. At parent-teacher night a few weeks later, every teacher had praise to share. They described Clara as a student who noticed when classmates felt left out and invited them into group projects. She helped younger children in reading circles and often volunteered to tidy the art room after class. One chilly afternoon, a certified letter arrived in our mailbox. Inside were papers showing that Evelyn and Richard had opened a small trust fund for Clara. The document stated that the money would be released only if they approved every withdrawal and were given regular updates on Clara's life. We scheduled a meeting with our family attorney, who reviewed the terms and confirmed we could decline without any consequence. The next day, I mailed the paperwork back with a short, polite note thanking them but declining the arrangement. We chose not to involve Clara in the discussion, deciding it was best left unmentioned. As autumn deepened, our neighborhood prepared for the annual Harvest Festival. Clara helped organize a children's art booth where she guided kids in making leaf collages and pumpkin prints. Parents watched as she calmly demonstrated how to layer colors and press patterns into paper. Her patience and cheerful instructions drew warm admiration from neighbors, and many families left with new artwork to hang on their refrigerators. Later that month, Clara received the Young Creator Award at a district school assembly for her dedication to community art. The auditorium erupted in cheers as she accepted the certificate and a small engraved plaque. Teachers and classmates crowded around afterward to congratulate her, and local newspapers included a short article highlighting her contributions. Not long after, a call came late in the evening. Richard's voice carried through the speakerphone, urging us to arrange a holiday visit before it's too late. Mark responded firmly, explaining that our schedule for the season was set and any visits would remain limited and planned in advance. December arrived with cold winds and soft snow. Instead of a large gathering, we planned a quiet winter holiday at home. We invited Clara's best friend and her family, along with a few close neighbors who had supported us all year. The house glowed with warm lights and the scent of cinnamon. Children decorated cookies while adults shared stories near the fireplace. When I gently asked Clara if she wanted her grandparents included, she shook her head and said she liked it better when it was just people who care. Her words came out soft but sure, carrying the quiet wisdom she had grown into. The night ended with a small circle in the living room. Clara opened a handmade book she had written and illustrated herself, a story about a girl who painted the sky with colors of kindness. She read each page aloud while her friends leaned closer to see the drawings. Mark and I sat nearby, listening to her clear voice fill the room. As the final page turned and the house grew still, I looked around at the calm faces of the people who had become our chosen family. The path we had taken, steady boundaries, careful choices, had built a home where Clara's laughter and creativity thrived without interruption. The snow fell softly outside while we sat together, a quiet ending to a year filled with growth, art, and the lasting comfort of a life protected from unnecessary chaos.